Alpha King came home early, and the Omega Maid whispered, "Stay silent. Reason will leave you frozen." The castle loomed over the kingdom like a jagged crown carved from ice and stone. Its towers pierced the gray skies, and the wind that swept through the halls carried the chill of centuries. Within these walls, life moved according to strict rules. The royals held power, the courtiers whispered, and the servants worked silently, unseen and unremarkable. Among them moved Alara, a young maid with hair like midnight and eyes too bright for a world so full of shadows. Alara had learned early that silence was safety. To speak unnecessarily was to invite notice, and in a castle where whispers carried further than swords, attention could be deadly. She moved through the long, echoing halls with practiced quietness, carrying trays of food, sweeping the floors, and dusting the ornate carvings of frozen deer and fierce dragons that adorned the walls. She saw much but said little, and perhaps that was why she had survived so long. Today, however, the castle's rhythm had been broken. Word had spread quickly, faster than a fox through the snow. The Alpha King had returned. Kalen, the ruler whose very presence commanded obedience, whose reputation for strength and cold judgment was known across the lands, had arrived home earlier than expected. Alara had seen the king once before, from afar, during the grand feast after the harvest. His voice had been like rolling thunder, his gaze sharp enough to slice through the bravest of men. She had hurried to bow her head, pretending not to notice him, but she had felt it, the weight of his stare, the almost unbearable pressure of being recognized, being acknowledged even in the smallest way. That memory returned now, and she felt her heart quicken. The corridors were quiet that morning, unnaturally so. Alara's footsteps made no sound against the stone, yet she could sense the tension in the air, the way the castle seemed to hold its breath. From the high windows, pale sunlight slanted in, dust motes floating in the air like tiny stars. She carried a tray of freshly baked bread toward the kitchens, hoping to remain invisible. A sudden echo of heavy boots shattered her careful silence. Her breath caught. Kalen had entered the castle. The guards fell into a strict formation, and the hall seemed smaller, darker, as if the walls themselves had bent closer to observe him. Alara froze, her hands gripping the tray, her knuckles white. She dared not move. She could hear the faintest scrape of the king's cloak against the floor, and she could feel the pulse of his presence even without seeing him. The Alpha King's footsteps grew closer. He did not call out. He did not shout for an announcement. Instead, he moved like a predator, precise and controlled, each motion deliberate. And then he passed her, so close that she could feel the cold that seemed to cling to him, a frost that was more than the air of the castle. Alara's heart pounded. She lowered her gaze, hoping that invisibility could shield her. Yet something in the air had changed. Kalen's eyes, sharp and unyielding, flicked toward her. For a moment, a sliver of recognition passed between them. She wanted to flee, to vanish into the shadowed corridors, but her feet remained rooted. He stopped for a moment. There was a silence, a pause filled with the unspoken weight of power. He did not speak. He did not smile. But the mere fact that he had noticed her was enough to make her chest tighten. Then, as quickly as he had halted, Kalen moved on, his attention drawn elsewhere. Alara exhaled slowly, her knees weak. She leaned against the wall, clutching the tray as if it could anchor her to the world. Her pulse was still racing, her mind alive with fear and fascination. Later that afternoon, Alara was assigned to clean the northern wing of the castle, a place rarely visited by servants, where tapestries of long-forgotten kings hung, their faces frozen in judgment. She moved quietly, brushing dust from the intricate embroidery, listening to the echo of her own movements. The castle was alive with whispers, though no one spoke aloud. The northern wing was colder than the rest of the castle, as if the stone itself remembered ancient sorrows. Alara shivered. The wind moaned through the gaps in the windows, and for a fleeting moment she thought she heard something else, soft, almost like a sigh. She paused, listening, but there was nothing. Only the wind, only the silence, only her heartbeat. That evening, as the sun dipped behind jagged mountains, the castle seemed to exhale. Candles flickered to life, casting golden pools of light across the walls. Servants scurried to complete their duties, and yet Alara lingered, drawn by a sense of anticipation she could not name. Kalen had entered the throne room that day, meeting with his council, but something in the air had shifted. The way the guards stood, the way the courtiers whispered, even the way the banners seemed to flutter with more urgency, everything spoke of change, of something unseen moving just beneath the surface. Alara found herself near the grand staircase, cleaning the rails. Her reflection in the polished wood showed a pale, anxious face, eyes wide. And then she heard it, a whisper. "Stay silent." Her breath caught. The voice was soft, almost fragile, and yet it carried a weight that made her shiver. She spun, expecting to see another servant or perhaps a hidden courtesan playing a trick. But there was no one. Only the shadows stretched long against the walls, curling like fingers of smoke. Her heart raced. She wanted to run, to scream, to demand answers, but the voice had been right. Silence was her only shield. She swallowed hard, pressing a hand to her chest as if it could hold in the fear. The wind seemed to carry the voice away, leaving only the empty corridor and her quickened breathing. She straightened, forcing herself to move, to finish the task at hand. But a part of her could not shake the sense that someone, or something, was watching. Later that night, the castle slept beneath a sky full of cold stars. Alara moved quietly through the halls, carrying a lamp to light the northern wing. The corridors were empty, the tapestries silent witnesses, yet the sense of being observed had not faded. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward her, every sound amplified in the quiet. She reached the large arched window overlooking the frozen courtyard. The moonlight shimmered across the ice, and for a moment the world seemed still and beautiful. She allowed herself a small, private sigh, and then she felt it, a presence behind her. She turned slowly. Kalen stood there, tall and imposing, cloak trailing behind him. His face was partially hidden in shadow, but his eyes shone like steel against the dim light. "You heard it too," he said softly, not accusatory, but with a weight that made her knees weak. I thought it was just the wind," she whispered, unsure whether she wanted to be truthful. He studied her for a long moment. "The castle has eyes," he said finally. "And sometimes it speaks to those who listen." Alara shivered. The words were both a warning and an invitation. She did not know if she wanted either. Kalen moved closer, his boots silent on the stone floor. The warmth of his presence, so close, made the chill of the castle feel sharper. He stopped just short of her, close enough that she could see the faint frost along his cloak, along the edges of his gloves. "Do you fear the castle?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. She nodded, unable to speak. Fear and something else, something she dared not name, curled in her chest. "Good," he said quietly. "Fear keeps you alive." For a heartbeat they stood like that, the cold pressing in from all sides, the unspoken tension between them like the edge of a blade. Then Kalen turned, walking away without another word, leaving Alara trembling in the quiet corridor. Her lamp flickered, shadows dancing across her face. She pressed her hand to her lips, the words she wanted to say trapped inside. The night stretched on, long and full of possibilities she could not yet name. And in the deepest shadows of the castle something moved, watching, waiting, patient. Alara returned to her small quarters, but sleep would not come. The whisper haunted her, curling around her thoughts like frost over glass. "Stay silent." She pressed herself to the bed, pulling the thin blanket around her shoulders, staring at the ceiling. Her mind replayed the king's presence, the weight of his gaze, the unspoken understanding that had passed between them. She did not yet know the truth, that Kalen had returned not just to rule, but to seek something he had lost. That the castle itself had secrets older than the royal line. That her life, small and hidden though it seemed, was about to change forever. And in the stillness, she realized something terrifying and exhilarating. She wanted to see him again. The wind moaned outside her window. The castle seemed to lean closer, listening. "Stay silent," the whisper repeated. And deep inside, Alara understood she could not stay silent forever. Cliffhanger for Part I. She held her breath, and a single whisper, barely audible, threaded through the cold. "Do not run." Somewhere in the shadows, the castle waited, and so did the king. The castle woke slowly the next morning. Sunlight struggled through the thick gray clouds, touching the frost-covered towers with a pale, hesitant light. Servants hurried along the corridors, carrying baskets of bread, bowls of porridge, and clean linens. The air smelled of wood smoke, cold stone, and a faint metallic tang that Alara could not name. She moved quietly as always, though her thoughts were far from the tasks at hand. The memory of Kalen standing near the northern wing, the whisper of his voice, and the weight of his gaze pressed upon her mind like a heavy stone. She could not forget it. Nor could she forget the warning, the whisper in the shadows: "Stay silent." Alara had been told many things in her short life. Obey, be quiet, hide what you feel. But now her silence felt fragile, almost dangerous. Something stirred in the castle, something she did not yet understand. She could sense it, like a ripple beneath the ice. Her chores led her toward the library, a forbidden section where only trusted servants and the scholars of the castle were allowed. The shelves stretched high, holding leather-bound tomes and scrolls covered in dust. It was said the library contained secrets of the kingdom and even older knowledge of bloodlines, curses, and forgotten magics. Alara brushed her hands over the cold wood, tracing the spines of books without opening them. One book in particular drew her attention. Its cover was black, embossed with a symbol of a frost-covered crown. She hesitated, knowing she had no right to touch it, but curiosity overcame fear. The moment she lifted the cover, a chill swept through the room, and the candle flames flickered as if startled. The pages revealed stories of an ancient curse, a frost that followed a bloodline, binding its members to power and danger. Alara's pulse quickened. She had always known she was different, that her family had secrets, but reading the words made her fears real. The curse had been passed down through generations, and her own life was tied to it in ways she could not yet fully understand. A sudden sound made her spin. A shadow fell across the floor, the tall, familiar figure of Kalen. His eyes, gray and sharp like storm clouds, studied her from the doorway. "You should not be here," he said softly, stepping into the dim light. I was just cleaning," Alara stammered, closing the book quickly. Kalen's gaze did not leave her. "You are not like the others," he said. His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made her chest tighten. "You feel too much. You notice too much. The castle, it does not forgive those who linger too long in the wrong places." Alara lowered her eyes, unsure whether to feel shame or fear. I did not mean to," he held up a hand, stopping her. "I am not here to punish you." He stepped closer, and the faint frost along his cloak seemed to grow, brushing the edges of the candlelight. "I am here because I sense something in you, something powerful, dangerous." Her heart thumped. She wanted to deny it, but she knew she could not. The truth had been there for years, buried beneath layers of silence and fear. I am different," she admitted in a whisper. "I do not know how to control it." Kalen's eyes softened, though the storm in them did not vanish. "Power is not something you control with will alone. It is something you understand and something you accept." Alara wanted to speak, to ask questions, to reach out, but the memory of the whisper stopped her. "Stay silent." The hours passed slowly. Kalen remained in the library, walking the high shelves, reading fragments of old prophecies and chronicles. Alara worked silently nearby, her hands moving over dusted tables and polished floors. Every so often, Kalen would glance at her, and every glance sent a shiver down her spine. By afternoon, the wind outside had grown colder, carrying a scent of ice and distant mountains. Alara could feel the castle itself reacting, the walls trembling as though aware of the tension within. Something deep and ancient stirred in the stones, responding to her presence and perhaps to Kaelin's. "Why do you linger here?" Kaelin asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Alara hesitated. I do not know, perhaps because I am used to the shadows." He nodded, as though he understood more than she could say. "Shadows hide more than the light ever can, but shadows can also hide you from yourself. You fear what you cannot see, but sometimes the greatest danger is what lies inside you." Alara's fingers trembled slightly as she wiped a table. The words were heavy, almost unbearable. She wanted to tell him everything, to confess the fear she had carried for years. But the warning from before whispered in her mind, louder now than ever, "Stay silent." Even as she obeyed, she knew it was impossible. Kaelin's presence was a flame, and her fear and curiosity were dry tinder. The room felt smaller, hotter, though the chill never left. As evening fell, the servants were dismissed, leaving only Alara and Kaelin in the library. Outside, the sky was a dark canvas, the first stars piercing through the clouds. A crescent moon glimmered faintly over the frost-covered towers. Kaelin moved to the large window, his profile outlined against the pale light. "The castle has many secrets," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Some are old, some are waiting." Alara felt the pull of his words. She wanted to ask what he meant, but the fear of speaking was stronger. Instead, she remained silent, hands folded before her. Then, without warning, the candlelight flickered violently, and a gust of cold wind swept through the library. Books trembled on the shelves, and the frost on the windows thickened in an instant. Alara gasped. She had not done this, it had not been her magic. Or had it? She could not tell. She had felt the stirrings of power before, but never like this, never so sudden and uncontrolled. Kaelin turned to her, eyes wide now, gray like winter skies before a storm. "Show me," he said softly, his voice both command and plea. Alara shook her head. I cannot. I am afraid." He stepped closer, stopping just short of her. The frost clung to the edges of his cloak, curling into small spirals in the air between them. "Fear will not protect you," he said. "It will only bind you." She looked at him, at the intensity in his gaze, and for a moment she felt the pull of something dangerous and irresistible. She wanted to run, to hide, but her feet remained planted. The truth pressed against her chest, aching to escape. And then it happened. A small, unintentional spark of power flickered from her hands, curling into the air like a thin ribbon of ice. The candle flames shivered and dimmed. Books rattled on the shelves. Kaelin's eyes softened, and yet there was a shadow of worry in them. "You cannot hide it," he said. "Nor should you try. You are stronger than you know, and yet without guidance, stronger is dangerous." Alara's chest heaved. She had wanted to stay silent, to remain invisible, but now silence seemed impossible. The king had seen her, truly seen her, and there was no going back. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Shadows shifted along the walls of the library as if alive, curling around the two of them. Alara felt the weight of generations pressing down upon her, the curse that had followed her bloodline, the power she had inherited, the danger she carried even in her quiet hands. Kaelin moved closer still. "You will need guidance," he said, "and you will need trust. The castle and the kingdom will not wait while you decide whether to hide or to stand." Alara swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. I do not know if I can," she whispered. "You can," he said simply, "because you have no other choice." The words struck her like a bell in the quiet library. No other choice. Not to hide, not to run, not to remain silent. The frost in the corners of the room seemed to pulse with her heartbeat, as though the castle itself understood the moment she had reached. And then Kaelin left. He walked to the door and paused, looking back at her. "Do not fear me," he said quietly. Fear the shadows, yes, but not me. If you trust yourself, you may yet control what is yours. Alara watched him go, her mind spinning. She wanted to speak, to ask him more, to demand answers, but the words remained trapped. The warning whispered once more, soft and urgent, "Stay silent." She sank to the floor, leaning against a shelf. Her hands trembled, the faint glow of frost fading from the air around her. The library was quiet again, but it felt different, charged, alive, full of possibility and danger. That night in her small quarters, she could not sleep. The king's presence lingered like a shadow across her thoughts. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the rapid pulse of fear and excitement intertwined. Somewhere deep in the castle, the frost stirred, and somewhere in her heart, something began to thaw. She realized that silence was no longer a choice. And soon, the kingdom would learn that even the smallest servant could hold power that could change everything. The whisper returned one last time, as she drifted into uneasy sleep. The frost is not just in the castle, it is in you. The night was colder than usual, the moon sharp and silver against the frostbitten sky. Outside the castle walls, the wind howled like a restless spirit, carrying with it the smell of snow and distant pine. Alara could feel the cold even through the thick walls, pressing against her, a reminder of the power that had begun to stir within her. She had spent the day in the library again, practicing control over the small flickers of frost she could summon. It was difficult, and every effort left her exhausted, but she could feel progress. Slowly, the power that had frightened her was beginning to feel like a part of her, not a curse to fear. Yet the presence of Kalen loomed over every thought, like the shadow of a great mountain. He had watched her, guided her, and challenged her without ever revealing the full weight of his intentions. Each time their eyes met, a tension pulsed through the air, a wordless question neither dared to speak aloud. That evening he found her near the northern balcony, looking out over the frozen courtyards below. The snow glimmered in the moonlight, untouched and pristine, as if the world itself had paused to watch them. "You work late," Kalen said, his voice low, careful. He stepped onto the balcony beside her, and she could feel the warmth of him, a stark contrast to the chill that surrounded them. Alara turned slightly, careful to avoid the intensity in his eyes. "The power, it will not wait. I must learn to control it before it controls me." He studied her for a long moment, the wind tugging at his cloak. "Control is a delicate thing," he said. "It cannot be forced, only understood, only accepted." She looked away, her fingers brushing the edge of the stone railing. "And if I fail?" she asked softly. "If it grows too strong," Kalen's gaze softened, but there was still an edge of steel in his voice. "Then it will take you places you do not wish to go, and perhaps places I cannot follow. That is the nature of power." The words sent a chill deeper than the cold night. Alara felt the weight of the responsibility pressing on her chest. It was not just her life she carried. It was the legacy of her bloodline, the fate of the kingdom, and the fragile line between order and chaos. A sudden movement in the courtyard below drew her attention. Shadows shifted unnaturally, and the snow seemed to ripple as if alive. Her breath caught. "Something is coming," she whispered. Kalen's hand moved, brushing hers lightly. The touch was brief, almost accidental, yet it sent warmth crawling up her arm. "We must see it clearly," he said. His eyes, gray and unyielding, scanned the courtyard with precision. From the shadows, a figure emerged. It moved like a ghost, silent and purposeful. Alara recognized it immediately, not human, not entirely, yet not a creature she could name. A wisp of cold followed it, curling through the snow like smoke. Kalen stepped closer, his presence commanding the space around them. "Do not be afraid," he said quietly. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Alara's heart hammered. She wanted to believe him, to draw strength from his words, but fear still clawed at her chest. The figure drew nearer, and the frost in the air thickened, forming delicate patterns that sparkled under the moonlight. Then, without warning, the figure stopped. Its head tilted slightly, as though sensing something unseen. Alara realized with a start that the frost was responding to her presence, bending and curling as if alive. She felt a pulse of energy surge through her, stronger than before, and the figure shivered in the cold. Kalen moved beside her, his eyes fixed on the figure. "You see now," he said, his voice steady. "Your power is real, and it does not fear you, it fears what it cannot understand." Alara swallowed, trying to calm the rush of emotions. "But what does it want?" she asked. "Why does it come?" Kalen's gaze did not waver. "Power always seeks balance, and right now your power and the castle are out of balance." The figure shifted again, stepping closer. A faint glow emanated from its form, and Alara realized it was drawn not by her presence, but by something older, something buried deep in the castle itself. "It's the curse," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's tied to me, to my family, to the frost." Kalen's hand found hers again, steadying her, anchoring her in the storm of fear and adrenaline. "Then we face it," he said simply. "Together." Alara nodded, drawing in a deep breath. She reached out, her hands trembling, and let the frost within her respond. It curled around her fingers like living ice, delicate yet potent, and moved toward the figure. For a moment the courtyard was silent. Then the figure recoiled, a hiss of cold air escaping its form. The frost around it shattered and reformed, and Alara realized with a surge of both fear and awe that she could control it, at least partially. Kalen watched silently, his presence unwavering. "Good," he said softly. "You are stronger than you think. Stronger than even you know." Her chest heaved and she felt a mixture of relief and terror. I did it," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Kalen nodded. "Yes, but this is only the beginning." The figure lingered for a moment longer, then vanished into the night, leaving a trail of frost that sparkled like shattered glass. The courtyard was silent again, the snow settling softly. Alara felt a shiver run through her, not from the cold but from the realization of what she could do and the consequences of her power. Kalen turned to her, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "Do you understand now?" he asked. "The weight you carry is greater than fear. It is responsibility, it is choice." Alara nodded slowly, her mind swirling. I think so," she said, "but it is hard, so hard." Kalen's gaze softened. "I know," he said quietly. "That is why you are not alone. I will guide you. I will protect you. And one day you will learn to trust yourself as much as you trust me." She wanted to believe him, to lean into the warmth he offered, but fear still lingered. She had always been taught to hide, to obey, to remain silent. Now the silence felt impossible. As the night deepened, Kalen led her back into the castle. The corridors seemed different now, charged with the energy of the frost that followed her, alive in a way she could feel with every step. They reached the northern wing and Kalen paused. "Rest," he said. "You have done well today, but tomorrow will be harder." Alara nodded, her mind already turning over the events of the night. She had faced a part of herself she had long feared and survived. But the shadow of the curse, the presence of the figure, and the weight of her power pressed on her still. That night, in her small quarters, she could not sleep. The memory of the figure, the frost, and Kalen's hand lingered in her mind. She pressed her hands to her chest, feeling the rapid pulse of life and power intertwined. And then she heard it, a whisper, soft and urgent, curling through the darkness. "Do not run." Alara froze. The voice was neither inside her mind nor outside it. It was part of the castle, part of her, part of the night itself. She understood in that moment that her journey was only beginning. She rose quietly, moving to the window, looking out over the frozen courtyard. The stars sparkled above, distant and cold, and the frost on the ground shimmered like a mirror of her own fear and determination. Somewhere deep in the northern wing, the castle seemed to breathe, waiting, watching. And somewhere deep in her heart, Alara knew that the frost inside her was alive, patient, and powerful. The wind howled again, carrying a scent of ice and danger. She shivered, not from cold, but from the realization that her life had changed forever. Kalen's presence was a memory, a promise, and a warning. The night had revealed the truth. The frost was not just a curse. It was a power, a force that could destroy or protect, and she would have to learn to wield it or risk losing everything she cared for. As she sank back into her bed, her thoughts refused rest. The whisper returned one last time, lingering at the edge of consciousness. The frost watches, and so do they. Alara pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the tremor of both fear and excitement. The castle waited, the kingdom waited, and Kalen, somewhere beyond her sight, waited as well. The winter was breaking, and with it, everything would change. The castle lay shrouded in silence as dawn broke. Pale light spilled over the frost-covered towers, turning the walls to silver. The kingdom outside seemed still, waiting, as if it could sense the change coming from within the ancient stones. Alara moved quietly through the northern wing. Sleep had eluded her all night. Her hands trembled slightly, but not from cold. Her own power thrummed beneath her skin, alive and restless. The frost within her was no longer just a curse. It was a part of her, and she could feel it responding to the world, bending subtly to her will. Kalen found her near the arched window overlooking the courtyard. He had been awake for hours, his figure dark against the soft morning light, cloak trailing behind him like shadowed water. His eyes met hers, calm yet alert, a mixture of authority and concern. "You are ready," he said simply. Alara shook her head. "I am not," she whispered. "I do not know if I can control it fully. Not yet." Kalen stepped closer, the frost along the edges of his cloak curling like living smoke. "Control is not the point anymore," he said. "Acceptance is. The moment you accept yourself completely, the power no longer fears you. It follows you." She swallowed, unsure if she believed him. "And what if the castle or the kingdom cannot survive my power?" His hand brushed hers, a brief, grounding touch. "Then you will guide it, because you are not alone. I will be by your side, always." For a moment she wanted to lean into him, to let the warmth of his presence banish the fear in her heart. But the weight of the coming day pressed upon her. She nodded, taking a deep breath. She was ready, or at least she would make herself ready. Beyond the castle walls, the northern forests were dark and full of threat. The cursed figure she had glimpsed before had returned, drawn again to the frost within her. Kalen and Alara descended into the courtyard, their steps leaving a trail of frost that glittered in the morning light. "Stay close," Kalen warned softly. "It is clever, and it will test you." Alara nodded, her hands curling into fists as the frost responded to her emotions. She could feel it spreading, coiling through her like liquid ice, ready to defend, ready to strike. From the shadows of the courtyard the figure emerged. This time it was larger, more defined. Its eyes glimmered like shards of ice, and it moved with a fluid, unnatural grace. The frost around it crackled and twisted, responding to Alara's presence. Kalen stepped forward, his sword drawn, though he made no move to strike. "It is not just an enemy," he said. "It is a part of what you must face. Fear it and it controls you. Accept it and you control it." Alara drew in a deep breath, feeling the pulse of frost within her respond. She could sense the history of the castle, the power that had flowed through its stones for centuries, and the weight of her bloodline. The figure was a mirror of the frost she carried, an echo of her own potential but twisted by neglect and fear. The two of them stood facing each other, a triangle of frost, shadow, and steel. The figure lunged first, moving with a speed that made the air shimmer. Alara instinctively raised her hands, and frost leapt from her fingers, forming a barrier of delicate ice that shimmered in the morning light. The impact rattled the courtyard, but she held firm. Kalen circled the figure, watching for openings, his presence steadying her. "Do not fight it," he called softly. "Flow with it, shape it." Alara hesitated. The figure's eyes bore into hers, reflecting every fear she had ever felt. The fear of power, the fear of failure, the fear of being alone. And then she remembered Kaelin's words, the touch of his hand, the unwavering calm in his voice. She exhaled slowly, letting the frost respond to her will, not her fear. The ice shifted, curling around the figure, forming shapes that mirrored her own movements. The creature stilled, almost as if surprised, then slowly it began to dissolve, breaking into shards of glittering frost that floated toward the sky. The courtyard was silent once more, save for the whisper of the wind. Alara's knees gave out and Kaelin caught her before she fell. She leaned against him, chest heaving, feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. The frost around them seemed to settle, shimmering in harmony with her heartbeat. "You did it," Kaelin said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You accepted it, and in doing so you have gained control." Alara pressed her hands to her chest, feeling the pulse of power calm beneath her skin. I can feel it," she whispered. "Not like before. Not like it's fighting me, but as if it is part of me." Kaelin nodded, a faint smile breaking the usual sternness of his face. "Exactly. Power is not the enemy, fear is, and you have learned to master it." They stood together in silence for a long moment, watching the first light of day touch the frost-covered towers. The kingdom below seemed peaceful, unaware of the battle that had just occurred, of the power that now flowed quietly through its walls. But the peace would not last long. Kaelin knew it, and so did Alara. The kingdom had enemies, those who would seek to exploit her power to twist it for their own ends. But for the first time, Alara felt ready. She would not hide. She would not run. Days passed, and the bond between them deepened. Kaelin trained her in control, in strategy, and in understanding the true nature of her power. Alara began to see him not just as a king, not just as a figure of authority, but as someone who understood the weight she carried. His presence became a steadying force, a reminder that even in a world of frost and shadows, trust could be found. One evening, Kaelin led her to the balcony of the highest tower. The wind was fierce, carrying snowflakes like scattered diamonds. Below them, the kingdom stretched in silence, peaceful for a fleeting moment. "You have grown strong," Kaelin said, his voice carried by the wind. "Stronger than I could have imagined." Alara looked at him, the moonlight catching in her eyes. "I could not have done it alone," she admitted. "I would not have known, I would not have tried without you." Kaelin studied her, the corners of his lips lifting slightly. "We are stronger together," he said, "and yet the journey is not over. The frost is patient, but it is not forgiving. You will need to face more before it fully accepts you." Alara nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She did not fear the trials ahead, not as much as she feared failing herself, but she was ready to try. For the first time, she truly believed that she could survive, even thrive. The castle seemed to sense her determination. The frost along the windows shimmered, the banners in the halls stirred, and even the ancient stones seemed to hum with quiet approval. Then came the whisper, soft and urgent, threading through the wind. "The frost remembers, the frost watches, and it tests." Alara pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the calm pulse of power beneath her skin. She looked at Kaelin. "I am ready," she whispered. He nodded, his hand brushing hers again. "Then let us face it together." The next challenge came sooner than they expected. A rival faction from the northern provinces had learned of the power within the castle, and they moved under the cover of night to seize it. The castle's defenses were strong, but their intentions were clear: to take control of what they did not understand. Kaelin and Alara prepared themselves. The frost responded to her presence, curling and shaping itself into sharp forms, delicate yet deadly. Kaelin's sword gleamed in the moonlight, his presence a shield and guide. When the invaders reached the outer courtyard, they found themselves stopped not by walls or guards, but by the living frost that moved with Alara's command. Ice rose from the ground like spikes, then melted into glittering streams that trapped the intruders without harming them. The power she had feared was now a weapon of protection, precise and controlled. Kaelin moved among them, his sword ready but his expression calm. Together they forced the intruders back, their combined strength unmatched. Alara's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the exhilaration of using her power for good, for the kingdom, for the first time willingly. When the last of the invaders fled, the castle settled again. The frost around them shimmered in approval, delicate and alive. Alara sank to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. Kalen knelt beside her, lifting her chin gently. "You see now," he said softly, "what you feared can be your strength. What you hid can protect those who matter. And what you are can change the world." Alara's lips curved into a small smile. I understand now," she whispered. "I am not afraid of the frost anymore. I am part of it, and it is part of me." Kalen's eyes softened. "Then the kingdom is in safer hands than it has ever known, and you are free finally to choose who you will be." The castle, the frost, the long shadows of the towers, they seemed to sigh in relief. Winter's long hold had loosened, replaced by a sense of balance, of power rightly used, of trust and connection. Alara pressed her hands together, feeling the warmth of her own heart and the strength of her magic intertwined. She looked at Kalen, and for the first time she felt truly safe. Not because the danger was gone, but because she was no longer alone. The frost had broken, and with it, so had the silence.